among independents, there actually is a difference. This is what's kind of interesting. Among independents, 59% say that they approve of Donald Trump being indicted on the 2020 election stuff. Only 49% say they approve on the classified documents stuff, which is, again, fascinating. You would think that it would be the reverse because, again, the classified documents case is much stronger, legally speaking, than the election stuff from 2020. All it really shows is that independents really don't like Donald Trump talking about the 2020 election. They really don't like what he did in the aftermath of the 2020 election. They really don't like January 6th. Okay, but there remains this massive disconnect between the conservative base and independents and the rest of the country with regard to President Trump. And this raises questions like, why is it that so many Republicans are really, really behind Trump in deep and abiding ways? And the answer is that it has less to do with Donald Trump than it has to do with reaction to leftist elites. That really is and that's always been the answer. I've said since the beginning of the Trump phenomenon that Donald Trump has always represented to conservatives and to traditionalists a giant pulsating middle finger, an orange middle finger directed at the entire left-wing apparatus. That's what he is. Right? The single best summation of the Trump phenomenon is, and get ready here with the bleep button, Trump because you. Right? That has always been the appeal of Donald Trump. That was the appeal of Donald Trump in 2015, 2016. It was the appeal of Donald Trump in 2020. And it's even more the appeal of Donald Trump in 2023, 2024. You don't get to tell us what to do is sort of the generalized mood with regard to President Trump. So the question is, where does that mood come from? Where does it come from? And the answer is, it is a direct reaction to a liberal elite who have decided that their values are more important than your values, who have decided that their priorities are more important than your priorities. And frankly, it comes from a group of people who could theoretically be called values traders. Okay, so to understand what exactly is going on here, you sort of have to think of the framework of history, broad writ. Okay, so Karl Marx famously says at the beginning of the Communist Manifesto, along with Engels, he says, the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle. And this is wrong. Now, that phrase has shaped nearly every theory about politics in the modern era. Everybody ranging from Francis Fukuyama to the Marxist theorists of the early 20th century is shaped by the idea that everything is about class. Today's politicians, left and right, Bernie Sanders, and on the right, people like Tucker Carlson, very often tend to conflate issues that are values-laden with issues that are economic-laden. So the idea is that the forgotten man is actually the person who's being left behind by the new meritocracy, by the economy, that everything is about class conflict. And if only we could redistribute, if only we could subsidize, we could do all of that and we could create solidarity again. All we would have to do is change the economic systems by which we live, and this would magically fix everything. But it's not true. The history of existing society for all of human history has not actually been about class conflict. In fact, virtually no conflicts in the history of humanity have been fought purely over class. This is what World War I did to the Marxist idea. World War I completely defeated the Marxist idea. The Marxist idea in World War I is that there would be, Europe-wide, a class revolution to end World War I. In fact, the home of Marxist revolution was not supposed to be in Russia, which basically had no classes. It had like a group of a few elites, and then it had a giant proletariat. Basically farmers, serfs, people who were very poor. It wasn't supposed to happen in poor countries. If you look at Karl Marx's writings, it was supposed to happen in like Great Britain. It was supposed to happen in richer countries where the excesses of capitalism would eventually cause so much income inequality and wealth inequality that lower classes would rebel against upper classes. And thus, when World War I broke out, Marxists were utterly befuddled because instead of the conflict breaking out between lower classes, middle classes, and upper classes, the conflict instead broke out between nationalities. It broke out over borders. And Germans, who were very poor, sided with Germans who were very rich to fight British people who were very poor and British people who were very rich. And it didn't cross-pollinate across class. Marx was wrong. World War I proved him wrong. But his idea continues to be the motivating factor in nearly all thinking politically still, which is the idea that economic circumstances determine class solidarity, which in turn determines politics. And it's not true. Is that dark spot on your face still bugging you? What about the liver spots on your hands, neck, and chest? Well, you can watch those disappear safely and quickly in about 3 minutes. Introducing the GenuCell Dark Spot Corrector. Their 3-step, 3-minute dark spot luxury system does exactly what it sounds like. by using the Cristal's microdermabrasion before the dark spot corrector and finishing with a touch of the collagen-building Genucel 15, you'll see dark spots disappear before your very eyes, instantly, smoothly, and luxuriously. Don't take my word for it. If you're not blown away with the results, you get 100% of your money back, no questions asked, free shipping, free returns. So again, you got nothing to risk here. All 3 products are included in Genucel's most popular package for August, so you get your Genucel bags and puffiness serum also included for 70% off retail. Head on over to Genucel.com/Shapiro. Order the new dark spot treatment system today. Say goodbye to those pesky spots tomorrow. That's Genucel.com/Shapiro, GENUCEL.com/Shapiro. I'm using Genucel for years. So is my wife. So is my mom. It is a great product. Go check them out right now. Genucel.com/Shapiro and order that new dark spot treatment system today and get your Genucel bags and puffiness serum also included for 70% off retail prices. You know a company is looking out for you when they actually upgrade your service and don't actually charge you for it. It's great news for new and current Pure Talk customers. Pure Talk just added data to every plan and includes a mobile hotspot with no price increase whatsoever. If you considered Pure Talk before, but you haven't made the switch, take a look again. For just $20 a month, you'll get unlimited talk, text, and now 50% more 5G data, plus their new mobile hotspot. This is why I love Pure Talk. They're veteran-owned. They only hire the best customer service team located right here in the United States of America. Most families are saving almost $1,000 a year while enjoying the most dependable 5G network in the country. Remember, you actually vote with how you spend your money, so stop supporting wireless companies that hate your guts. When you go to puretalk.com/Shapiro, you'll save an additional 50% off your very first month because they actually value you. That is puretalk.com/Shapiro. Pure Talk is wireless for Americans, by Americans. Go check them out right now. puretalk.com/Shapiro. Again, when you use that special /Shapiro, you'll save an additional 50% off your very first month of coverage. I've been using Pure Talk myself for all my business calls. Their coverage is great. They have the same 5G networks as one of the big guys. Go check them out right now. puretalk.com/Shapiro to get started. The real answer to the driving force behind history is, in fact, community. Community of interest. If we were going to rephrase Marx, what we would come up with is the history of all hitherto existing societies, the history of community struggles. Struggles between creedal communities, religious communities, people who have a common interest because they live together, because they share certain values. That is the real struggle that is taking place in America, and that is the real reason that Donald Trump is a representative of a particular class. He's not a representative of the lower classes, Donald Trump, because there are a bunch of people like me who make a lot of money who would support Donald Trump against Joe Biden and did in 2020. There are a bunch of people who are middle class who are supporting Donald Trump against Joe Biden. And there are a bunch of people who are lower class who are supporting Donald Trump against Joe Biden, despite the redistributionist promises of Democrats. So what is that about? That is not about economic circumstances. It's not about pure redistributionism. It's not about class struggle. It's about community struggle, which is a description of how society works. Okay, which is a description of what are the sort of cleavage points, the points at which Americans separate from one another. And where do you, in order to explain, you have to explain where Americans unify. We don't unify around class. Middle class people in California don't necessarily agree with middle class people in Florida. Poor people in Mississippi don't necessarily agree with poor people in New York. Rich people in Nebraska don't necessarily agree with rich people in Chicago. So it's really not about class. It really is about communities of interest. Historically, that has often been religious community. If you're talking about historic wars, basically from the dawn of time until the Peace of Westphalia, virtually all war was religious in nature. Then afterward, it turned into nationalistic war. And now we are sort of back to religious war. As it turns out, wars are very rarely fought on the basis of pure economic ideals alone. And if it is an economic ideal, it's not because it's an economic ideal, it's because it's a religion. Marxism has effectively become a religion. Soviet communism was a religion with a great sainted leader at the top who must be worshipped. And so the real cleavage in American society right now is not an economic cleavage per se. It is a values cleavage. It is a community cleavage. Okay, it is a cleavage between people who have more traditionalist values with regard to the United States and people who do not. And that has led to a class conflict as people who are high-income earners have essentially left behind their church and their community of interest and have formed a new community of interest with other people who earn. So we are now transmuting what were values conflicts into class conflicts, which is weird because, again, if you actually go over to Silicon Valley, widely perceived as a leftist hotbed, and I know tons of people in Silicon Valley, I talk with them regularly. If you actually go over to Silicon Valley and you talk to the heads of social media companies, the same people who are promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, environmental, social governance, those same exact people in their own homes, they are practicing conservatives. Those same people are married. They've been married for 20 years. They have kids. They don't let their kids play with the social media apps that they themselves create. The values they actually live out in their daily lives are fairly conservative. This is a point that Charles Murray makes in Coming Apart. All the same people who are preaching liberal nonsense directed at the very poorest in society, who they see as essentially playthings of the gods being themselves. Those very same people live values that are much more consistent with conservative middle-class Americans, traditionalist Americans. And it's sort of a fascinating phenomenon. To understand this, you have to understand two separate ideas of what they call the forgotten man. So the forgotten man is a phrase that's used in politics all the time. And who is the person at whom politics ought to be directed? The forgotten man, the person who is left behind. So who exactly is this forgotten man? That phrase was made famous originally by Franklin Delano Roosevelt back in 1932. And the forgotten man, according to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was the guy who's poor, right? The guy who's really poor. He's been forgotten by society, and it's our job to make it up for him. And the way to do that is to essentially redistribute all of America's resources with that guy in mind. Leave meritocracy behind. Leave the idea of performance behind. The person at the bottom of the spectrum is the person we ought to focus on. And this has defined Democratic Party policy for a very long time. You combine that on an economic level with the idea that liberal social policy ought to prevail, and that basically defines the Democratic Party today. So, according to Democrats, the forgotten man is the poor guy who must be given money and then preached to about the virtues of transgenderism and social justice. Are you tired of the lies and the twists of the mainstream media talking points? Yeah, me too. Join me in my newest series, Fact, where I dismantle and bring truth to this tiring mainstream agenda.